The family at my doorstep looked normal enough. Well, I shouldn't say normal. More like 1950s sitcom normal. A tall dad with a Cary Grant smile and a short blonde wife. And lined up behind them were 3 blonde kids who looked so much alike that they could have been triplets. And maybe they were. I was in the middle of prepping dinner when this poster child for the nuclear family showed up.
"Hello, miss," said the father. "We used to live here."
"Oh, nice," I said. And right then my dog, a patchy black and white mutt named Patchy, strode into the foyer, motionless. Usually she loved strangers, and I stepped outside and I pulled the door mostly shut. Patchy also loved running into busy highways. "The dog," I said, explaining why I stepped outside.
"What's the breed?"
said the father. "Clusterfuck." The mom winced like somebody spat in her face. I'm sorry," I said. The dad chuckled.
"We have a mutt back home, too," he said.
"Yeah, cool."
"So," he continued, "if it's not too much of a bother, would you mind if we showed the kids around? 15 minutes tops."
Round the house?
"We'd like to show them where their older sister grew up, if that's not a problem."
I forced a smile. I don't know. And behind me, the dog shoved her nose through the crack open of the door, sniffing as she tried to push her way out. "Get inside," I snapped as she scurried away, and I pulled the door fully shut. "I'm sorry, my girlfriend's coming over soon, and There was another flinch in the mother's face, this time at the word girlfriend, an all too boring reaction. I could almost hear her thinking, hate the sin, not the sinner.
"Say no more," said the dad, stepping back. "We understand. This was all very last minute, and thank you regardless."
The kids' faces filled with silent disappointment.
"We'll be passing through," he continued, "in another year or so I'll give you a proper heads up next time."
Another year? I thought, starting to feel a little bad. People pleasers unite. The family turned away and strode back towards a red minivan parked on the street, and I checked the time. Hey, I called out. 15 minutes? The dad looked back over his shoulder.
"Tops."
They started in an upstairs bedroom. Curious, and I followed.
"This room used to be bright pink," he said, pointing into a white-walled guest room. "Abby had a bunk bed with a slide over there." He looked up. "Glowing stars still up there, huh?"
He chuckled, looking back at me. And I smiled, never noticing them before.
"And this room,"
he said, stepping back into the hallway and strolling towards my bedroom. He gently pushed open the door to reveal my nuclear disaster of a room. Walls covered in video game posters, floors covered in dirty clothes.
"This was our second mess room."
"Now it's just a mess," I said. And he looked back at me, confused. And then he realized that I was trying to be funny, and he laughed politely.
"And this room over here,"
he stepped back across the hall. "I'm gonna go downstairs," I said. "Feel free to keep showing yourself around."
"Thank you."
He trailed off into realizing that he didn't know my name.
"Maya,"
I said.
"Thank you, Maya."
He turned back to his family and continued the tour. I was sitting at the table when they came downstairs. My dog sniffed around the floor, searching for fallen remnants of steak. A living room vacuum cleaner. The dad strolled up towards the basement door across the living room.
"Here's where we measured Abby's height,"
he said, pointing at the door frame.
"It's all painted over now."
He ran a hand over the smooth white finish. And that's when I noticed something a little odd. Ever since they'd shown up, only the dad spoke. Not a single word from anyone else. Just silent nodding and smiling. Maybe they were even more traditional than they looked. Or maybe they were mute. The dad reached for the basement door and tried to turn the handle. Locked.
Excuse me,
he called over. Oh, sorry, I'm renovating down there. He blinked at me. And? Yeah, lots of power tools, clutter, I said. Not exactly safe.
Don't worry about that. We'll be careful,
he said, glancing down to his kids, then back to me, hands still gripped around the locked doorknob. Sorry, it's not exactly work-safe standards down there, and some of the lights aren't even working yet.
We'll be careful,
he said again, and his jaw muscle twitched. No, sorry.
Of course.
He stepped away from the door and put his hands up.
I'm sorry to pester.
He dropped his hands and slid them into his pockets. As he meandered towards the kitchen, the family waited behind.
Go get your coats on,
he said, and they nodded silently and stepped back into the foyer, leaving him and me alone. He glanced over at the set dining table and then back at me.
Thank you again for this, he said. Means a lot to my kids.
Yeah, no problem, I said, pulling a shepherd's pie out of the oven.
Boy, does that smell good,
he said. Thanks. He lingered at the edge of the kitchen, rubbing the back of his neck with his hand.
This is, a little embarrassing, but...
He blushed red.
Have you ever noticed anything off here?
Off? I set the pie down onto the dining room table, pulled off my still warm mitts, and tucked them between my arms. He smiled grimly.
Well, I don't believe in it,
he trailed off,
or any of that stuff. But there was something odd going on here when we lived here.
He turned and looked out of the kitchen window, staring at his reflection, imposed over the night outside.
Margaret, my spouse, she didn't even want to come back here.
I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. I was a sucker for her ghost story, bullshit or not. I haven't really noticed anything, I said. And he waved his hand.
Of course.
He turned away from the window and strolled back towards the foyer.
Anyways, thank you again.
Wait, I said, and he stopped. My curiosity was beyond piqued. What happened? I said. He checked the time on his wrist and then scanned down the hallway towards the foyer. His family was distracted, the kids arguing about something and the mom trying to calm them down. I guess they weren't mute after all. He turned back towards me, stepped up to the edge of the kitchen, and lowered his voice a bit.
Nothing too crazy,
he said. Just little things. Dogs barking at the wall for no reason, lights turning on and off.
One time, Margaret swore that she saw somebody buck naked in the middle of winter climbing up the roof. And I went to look and nobody. No footprints in the snow either.
He shrugged.
Margaret, I love her, but she's always been a believer, to say it tactfully. So I kept brushing it off.
He glanced back towards the foyer again, as if making sure his family couldn't hear.
But then this one night, an old woman shows up at our front door. Late 60s or maybe early 70s. She's bundled up like winter in the middle of summer.
His jaw tensed up slightly and then relaxed.
She told us that she used to live here. Said her late husband built the place. Said that she wanted to take a look around, much the way that we did earlier. And we obliged, of course.
He sighed.
It was, fine at first. Just her walking around from room to room, talking about random memories. Like how she used to use our guest room as a sewing room, and how her husband ran his construction business from the living room. But then she steps into my first daughter Abby's room. Abby was just 10 years old back then, reading at her study table. And this old woman steps into the room and freezes. And then she starts just going absolutely banana crazy, screaming at us to get out of my house, get out of my house. And this poor woman basically had a psychotic breakdown right in front of us. Took us 20 minutes just to calm her down.
He shook his head, eyes filled with sadness.
As it turns out that she was a runaway from an assisted living location.
Oh wow, that's really sad. He nodded.
House never really felt the same after that. All the odd happenings, well, they just got worse. Way worse. One time in the middle of the night, every single light in the house turned on at the same time. Which you might think that was a power surge, right? He shook his head. The switches were flicked on too. He rubbed his jaw. Then one night, a giant boulder shows up in our basement. And he breathed out his nose like it was almost funny. Can you imagine that? A couch-sized boulder just inexplicably sat in the basement corner one morning. Too big to fit in and through any of our doors, too. Is it still here? What? The boulder. Is it still in the basement? I shook my head. It wasn't. He studied me, skeptical. Do you mind if I take a quick look down there? Just me, no kids. No, sorry. And at this point, I honestly didn't care if he went into the basement or not. Now I was just standing my ground out of principle. He half smiled. After the boulder showed up, the visitors started showing up. Sometimes twice a week. Random strangers at the door. All of them claiming that they used to live here too. Asking if they could take a look around. He looked back over his shoulder towards his family. And they were waiting for him now. Anyways, he shrugged. I'm glad that none of that is happening to you. The fact that he was a visitor who asked to take a look around hung in the air like a dead smell. His eyes drifted towards the metal meat tenderizer on the counter, and he reached over and lifted it. What's this for? A growing tension twisted in my gut. Everything about his body language was relaxed, but that almost made it worse. It's a meat tenderizer, I said. It's for tenderizing meat. He raised his eyebrows. Huh. Mallet still in hand. He glanced over at the set dining table. Looks good. Thanks, I said, stepping back towards the fridge, and he set the mallet down. Is there enough for us? I chuckled nervously. Was he joking? He wasn't. I'm sorry, we've just been driving for hours and we're famished. I looked at him unbelieving. I can pay you, he said, reaching into his back pocket and pulling out his wallet. No, that's okay, I said. Let me just get you some Tupperwares. And at this point, I just wanted them gone. I strode across the kitchen, squat down at the corner cupboard, and started digging through. And behind me, I could hear the rest of the family shuffling into the kitchen. Weird. I finally found the right stack of containers, and I stood up and turned around and... I froze. The family sat around my dinner table, eating and talking as if they had been there for minutes. The parents ate from the set plates, while the kids ate at their food right off the tablecloth. Okay, what? I said, incredulous. Everything went dead silent. They turned to look at me, eyes filled with confusion. The dad was in the middle of cutting into the steak. Are you okay, miss? He said, voice filled with tension. I had no words. They were looking at me the same way people look at a raving lunatic. Forced calm. My dog strutted into the room and lurched to a stop, and he started growling. Miss, it's fine. We're okay here, said the dad, gently placing the steak knife down, wiping his hands onto his sides and stepping up from the table. But we're really gonna need to go outside, okay? He stepped around the table, and I glanced over at Patchy and the snickering twist of dread came over me. She wasn't growling at the family. She was growling at me. She's okay, he said, talking to the dog. Miss, we're gonna need to step outside, and we can get you whatever you need, okay? Do you need money or food? He stepped towards my dog and crouched down. I'm sure you're not dangerous, he said, talking to me. But right now, I just need you away from my family, just in case. Okay? He stroked Patchy's neck, and she stopped growling, and her tail started wagging. Miss, he said, looking up at me. I don't know what this is, I said, but you all need to leave right the fuck now, I hissed through gritted teeth.
The father looked at his wife, and she looked down at him. Sadness in her eyes. He held out his hand, and she reached onto the table and grabbed the steak knife and handed it to him. Knife gripped into his hand. He looked at me, sighed, pulled my dog close, and pushed the knife into the side of her jaw. "It's okay," he whispered to the whimpering dog. "It's okay." His eyes watered. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. I just stood there, paralyzed. Everything silent as the rest of his family broke into a flurry of panic, leaping up from the table and backing into the wall, faces filled with terror, but not with terror of him. Terror of me. My eyes drifted to the metal mallet sat on the counter's edge. Before I knew it, it was in my hand, and I was charging towards them. I swung and the mallet cracked against the side of his jaw. The mother shrieked as he leapt towards me and tackled me to the ground, pinning me down, face first against the cold, vinyl floor. "Margaret, call the police!" he yelled, yanking the mallet from my hand and tossing it. It thudded to the ground and slid across the floor and streaked through a puddle of dog's blood. "Miss, you need to calm down," he said. The spittle from his mouth dotted against the back of my neck. I kicked and I screamed, but it was no use. My head was pinned sideways against the floor, staring at the dead eyes of my dog. A slowly expanded puddle of blood between us. He held me there until the police arrived. This is the point in my experience where I might lose some of you, especially those with a more rationalist view. You might think that I'm crazy, and I very well might be. But spending the last while locked away in a high-security psych ward, I've had a lot of time to think and do a lot of research. And all of it has led me to only one possible conclusion. This family, or whatever they were, bent reality itself. Of course, when the police showed up, I told them everything. How the visiting family seated themselves at my dinner table and began to eat my dinner. How I confronted them, and they proceeded to act like I was some lunatic intruder. And how the father stepped up from the table and murdered my dog with a steak knife. The family's version, of course, was the exact opposite. They were enjoying a peaceful steak dinner at home when a crazed-looking woman showed up and proceeded to kill their beloved family dog. Then she insulted the father with a cooking mallet. Complete bullshit. I knew enough about legal proceedings and modern-day forensics to know that my case was rock solid, not to mention the fact that my name was on the deed to the house. This was all cut and dry. At least that's what I thought. But that's not how any of it played out. According to the official documents, the family owned the house, and they'd been living there for years. All of my neighbors vouched for the family, even the older woman I used to trade recipes with. Nobody recognized me at all, not even my girlfriend. According to the lead psychiatrist here at the criminal psych ward, I escaped from some other ward outstate years before. They tell me that I've got a laundry list of psychotic conditions, and my version of the events is nothing more than an elaborate hallucination. Complete bullshit. Now I've done enough reading to know that hallucinations don't work that way. They don't work like they do in the movies, with neatly tied up ends and continuity. This family altered reality. That was the only explanation. Of course, I can't say that flat out anymore. That'll just keep me locked up in here longer. But if I can find enough evidence, if I can lay out my case with reason and facts, then I'm almost there too. I'm gonna tie all these threads tied together. It's taken me 16 years of being locked away in this hellhole. But I'm almost free. I know it. Just a few more months of research, and I'll convince them. I know what you're thinking right about now. You're probably siding with the psychiatrists. You'll think I'm crazy. But give it a few more months. I'm gonna blow this whole case wide open. You'll see. Any day now.
Hold it right there. We have a bonus story for you tonight. But first, I wonder why he wanted in the basement so bad. Maybe there was a party or a celebration.
I got this package in the mail from my dad. A brown paper wrapping, large but flat, with the word fragile written on it in black ink. When I unwrapped it, it was this big acrylic painting framed in some sort of bronze gilded plaster. The painting itself was of this long hallway full of doors, kind of like what you'd see in a fancy hotel. The walls had edging about halfway up. The upper part was painted sort of an off-white, while the lower half was a crimson red that blended into the carpeting. Between each door was an upturned light, as well as one of the far end walls at the end, where the corridor seemed to connect to another hallway running perpendicular to it, disappearing around the corner. It was really amazing detail, though I wouldn't call it lifelike by any means. Just the sheer amount of intricate pieces to each aspect of the scene showed that this artist really paid attention to every little thing. Like somewhere in the world was this hallway, and you could stand in it and hold this painting up, and if it weren't for the border and the clearly stylized art, you wouldn't be able to tell where the canvas ended and the real world began. I called him up and thanked him immediately. But where did you find this? I got it at an auction. I kind of figured as much. So I hung up the painting in my office, just behind my desk, which I realized later wasn't actually the best place for it because in order to actually look at it, I had to swivel completely around. But there wasn't anywhere better, really, and once I'd gotten it hung up, I felt less willing to take it back down, so I just sort of left it there. It kind of hung out over my shoulder and watched me work, and every now and then I'd turn it around and I'd stare at it and get entranced by it, feeling like I could get up and put my hands into the frame and climb into the painting as the frame were a window. And of course, I wouldn't be writing this if something weird didn't happen as a result of the painting. We had a couple of friends over, Mark and Sabrina, and Mark and I went into my office, and when the women folk started talking about knitting, which has become my wife's new favorite hobby, I went and sat down at my laptop to find a video that I had been telling Mark about, and Mark wandered over and started admiring the painting. Where'd you get that? My dad bought it for me at an auction and just gave it to me. It's kind of creepy. It's not creepy. It's kind of, I don't know. Hypnotic? Yeah. I turned around to look at him while the video loaded. He got up close and he was running his finger over the canvas, feeling the raised acrylic, and I just let him wander over all the details again. Huh. I didn't notice that before. What? At the end of the hall, there's some sort of light coming from around the corner, and it's casting a shadow on the floor. I got up and I looked closer, because I really hadn't spent a lot of time studying the far end of the hallway. There was definitely some yellow and some darker colors making what looked like a shadow of a person come from around the corner. I even reached out and I touched it to make sure that it wasn't some sort of trick of the light in the study, making it just look like there was a shadow in the painting. But I felt the paint, and sure enough, it was actually there in the painting. See what I mean? Mark said. Creepy. I genuinely felt weirded out by now. It was one of those moments where you start thinking, why didn't I notice this earlier? Was it there to notice? A couple of days later, I was working on a project in my study, and it was 9:30 at night, and I just couldn't focus. So I spun around in my chair to look at the painting, and I felt the sudden vertigo effect, like the ground wasn't there and I had to grab onto my chair to keep from tumbling into the emptiness. You wouldn't have noticed it if you hadn't looked at the painting 100 times like I had. The hallway was long, with exactly 6 doors. I remember because I counted them the first day, 3 on the left and 3 on the right, each with a little shiny metal doorknob. Only now there were 7 doors, 3 on the left and 4 on the right. It didn't make sense. Everything looked proportionally exactly the same, and the far end of the corridor was just as far away. And yet there was a 4th door on the right-hand side of the hallway, with its little metal doorknob. I don't even know which floor was the 4th floor. That's how well it blended in. I just know that there were 4 doors where there was once only 3. What the hell is going on? I turned away in my chair and back to check several times and make sure that my eyes weren't playing tricks on me, but the number of doors remained constant. I called my dad again and I asked him, "Is this a trick painting that you sent me?"
What do you mean?
I mean, it keeps changing. I can see it changing.
Not as far as I know. It was just one in a bunch I picked up at all the same auction.
After I got off the phone, I took the painting down and I checked the back, as if maybe there was some sort of mechanical or digital hocus pocus, but it was all soft canvas. And so I left it on the floor behind my office chair with the painting facing the wall, because the thought of it was freaking me out. The next day, I pulled my wife into the office and I held the painting up so that way she could see it because she hadn't had a chance to look before. "How many doors are there?" I asked, and she looked it over for a moment. 7. When I first got this, there were 6. She just looked at me like I was being a goofball. "Okay, so which one wasn't there before?" "I have no idea." "You don't know which door magically appeared?" And she laughed and gave me a kiss and went back into the other room. It gets worse. The next time I chatted with Mark, I told him about the extra door in the painting. "Are you sure that there weren't 7 doors to begin with?" "Well, I would swear I counted 6. "Well, if another one shows up, at least Melissa counted 7, and you can confirm it then. You know what you should do? You should take a photo of the painting so that way you can prove if anything else changes." What a great idea. So I got my phone and I took a photo of the painting. And 2 days went by, and nothing happened. And on the 3rd day, I walked into my office and there was a man staring at me. Well, I mean, it wasn't. I can't say that it wasn't a man or a woman. Hell, I can't even say if it was human. There was a shape at the end of the hallway in the painting. It was oddly lacking in detail that the rest of the painting had like someone had hurriedly painted it on. I ran my hand over it to make sure that it wasn't fresh, that someone hadn't actually come in and painted over my painting to drive me crazy. And it was really there. And the look of it scared me more than anything else, changing painting included. I wish that I could do it justice with words, but the best that I can describe it is that it was human-ish, with legs and arms, but it seemed squat or hunched and lopsided, like someone had slapped a blurry Quasimodo onto an otherwise beautiful painting. You couldn't see the details of the face, but you could see the shading on it, defining really warped features. I was almost glad that there wasn't any more detail to it, except that it just was enough for the imagination to give one nightmares. But I had proof. Here was the proof that the painting was changing, and so I brought up the file on my laptop to show my wife for comparison. Only when I did, the figure was in the photo too. And at no point did I start questioning my sanity about all of this. Something unnatural and terrifying was going on. So I took the painting out of my house and set it on the curb where we put our trash for pickup. I was so done with that painting. Or so I thought. The next evening when I got home from work, it was gone from the curb. I figured that someone had seen it and taken it home, and I waved my hands and I said, "Good, now it's someone else's problem." And I went in, played with my daughter, had dinner, put them to bed, and after watching a show with my wife, I went into my office to check my email. No, the painting wasn't back on the wall. I made sure of that the moment that I walked in the door. But I got a message from Mark asking if the painting had changed anymore, and I told him about the creepy new addition and also how I'd gotten rid of the painting. "Oh man, that sounds cool. I wish that I'd gotten a chance to see it." "Well, I can send you a photo of it that I took." Oh yeah, man, that'd be awesome. So I opened the image file, and the thing in the painting had raised its arms. Before, you could only barely make out the arms hanging at its side, but now both arms were raised over its head and its fingers were spread apart like it was waving hello at me. I think it was waving hello at me. I zoomed in as best as I could without pixelating the image, and the shading contours of the face seemed stretched into a grin. Oh, Jesus, Mary and Joseph. I sent Mark the file, but the connection kept fucking up. So I put it in a folder on my Dropbox account and gave him access to it. The file's corrupted, he texted me. I tried to open it as well, but he was right. Every time I copied the image file, somehow it got corrupted. It must be some spooky magic, Mark joked. This is not a joke. I am freaking out over here. Just delete the file if it's scaring you so bad. So I deleted the file. But it gnawed at me, you know. The painting was still changing. In horrible and terrifying ways. Seemingly acknowledging my observation of it. And now it was gone. But if it was gone, why should it matter? If something unholy happens, it's the problem of whoever has the painting now, right? And they'll see it changing too. Won't they? No shit. It was 2 days later, and I was organizing a folder of documents that I'd accidentally deleted a couple that I hadn't meant to. I went into the Windows recycling bin and, you guessed it, there was the image file along with the documents. I had to look. I was trembling with dread at the thought of it. But when something so unreal happens to you, you have to witness it and see it through to the end. I recovered the file and opened it. The wall of the hallway seemed to be melting. The partition separating the red from the off-white was lower than it had been before and drooped in places. The ridges of the lights looked like they were peeling off. The carpet seemed less crimson and more reddish-brown, and the figure had taken several steps down the corridor towards the viewer's perspective. More details had become defined. Hair hanging off its head, long and black like it had been painted with a fine-tipped brush. The eyes were a little more than dull black points under the shades of the brow. The grin came with teeth, uneven and fat, like those of a child more than an adult. Its arms were extended out on either side of it, touching both walls. One foot was ahead of the other, as if it was caught in mid-step in a game of red light, green light. I realized that I was panting and shaking as I looked at it. It was really hard to breathe. An anxiety attack. The painting was going to make me pass out, just from looking at a digital photo of it. And quickly I closed the image to calm myself. But that suddenly brought forth the thought. What if it progresses every time that I look away? The only way that it stops is to keep looking. And I opened the file again. No change. Oh, no. Wait. That wasn't a new change. I noticed it before, but it hadn't dawned on me. One of the doors was open. There was a dim blue light coming from the room inside. Moonlight, I thought. And just outside the threshold of the door, there was an object lying on the floor. I zoomed in for better detail. It was a little yellow stuffed lion with a scraggly orange mane. A child's toy. Of all the details, the melting hallway, the grinning fiend with arms wide open, the blue light from the open doorway, it was the innocent nature of that little toy lion that filled me with the most dread. And my wife came into the office. Come kiss Gabby goodnight. I went into her darkened room, where she was wrapped in her blankets in her bed, hugging a half-dozen stuffed animals and looking cute as could be. My little darling. God, I loved her so much. I kissed my daughter goodnight. She kissed me back and hugged her little pillow pet with the built-in nightlight. It glowed through a variety of colors. I love you, baby, I told her. Can you get my Simba? I looked around. Where'd you leave it? Over there. She pointed to the closet. And the door was open, and her toy lay on the floor just inside. Simba. Her little yellow, stuffed lion with the scraggly orange mane. Seeing it lying there, just past the threshold of the closet door, while the dim glow of my daughter's nightlight faded from red to purple to blue. I felt my heart rise up in my chest. The closet was just a closet. I could see that it was just a closet. There were clothes on hangers and bags with toys and books in them. They were right there. And yet, as I looked at the stuffed lion lying on the floor waiting for me, I felt as if I could see carpeting on the floor inside the closet, even though there was none. Carpeting, not in my vision, but in my imagination. And maybe if I went in and shut the door, I'd find that the walls beyond those clothes had wooden partitions, red below and off-white above. And maybe there was something hunched and terrible shambling its way towards us, even as I stood there staring at the toy. I walked, briskly trying not to look half as frightened as I was, snatched up Simba and shut the closet door. My breathing was heavy, like I had just run a mile and was struggling to avoid gasping for breath as I tried to calm myself down. "Hey, did that poster fall down?" I asked nobody in particular, then pretended that I was trying to adjust a cat poster that had been on the floor by her dresser for months, and I shoved the heavy dresser over so that way it was partially blocking the closet door. "Here's Simba, sweetie." I handed the line to Gabby, gave her a quick hug and kissed her, and wished her goodnight before rushing back to my office. The painting had changed, as I knew it would. The open door was closed and the toy gone from the floor. The hallway was dimly lit with yellow light from the melting lights again. But the thing, that not-so-quite-human fiend, was standing right outside the shut door, its body turned to face it with both hands pressed up against the door itself like it was running its hands down it, caressing it, and it turned its head towards me, still grinning that awful, frightening grin full of gnashed, crooked teeth. Oh God, how close had it been? No, it's just a closet. The hallway is not there. It's not real. None of this is real. I put up signs around the neighborhood, knocked on doors, and asked everyone I know, and many I don't, if they know who took the painting. I need to find it and get it back. I want to tear it, shred it with my hands, throw it in the fire and watch it burn to ashes. Jesus God in heaven. I hope it didn't end up in some landfill. Because I've learned the awful truth. All doors lead to the hallway.